Welcome. We are going to present to you Improving Crops Through Practical Application. On the panel today, first I'll start off, my name is Sasha. On the panel today, we have TRACI Woodward. We also have Brigitte Simons. We have Troy Henderson, and we have Jen Caldwell. Today, we'd like to dive into, how can the micro scale producer, how can the LP, how can the hemp processor really improve their crops sustainably and through practical application of so many of the various tools we have at our disposal in the cannabis market. I'd like to start off by asking a more existential question as to, for the panel, why cannabis? I mean, you guys have come from different fields in the past. What has cannabis done for you and what drew you to it?
Well, I can go first. So while working at Virox, we like to support and enter industries that we see a need for disinfection. So we have a background in like hospitals, pharmaceutical, a lot of those like high need industries. We saw cannabis being that next one, and there was actually very little support. I'm sure most people who are familiar with the regulations are familiar how vague they are when it comes to sanitation, disinfection, and biosecurity. So we saw a need there. We entered the market, we learned a lot, and now we're giving back and helping a lot in the industry as well.
I can go next. Probably my biggest reason for changing from the pharmaceutical industry as a quality professional was the personal interest in the cannabis industry and the excitement around the new industry and the ability to have transferable skills from pharmaceuticals over to the cannabis space.
Very drawn to the cannabis industry after I talked to some medical patients who were using cannabis to treat a variety of ailments and help with their symptoms. And it seemed like such an opportunity to bring this healing plant to more people and to try to have it more accepted generally in society and get rid of some of the stigma through education. And it was really those medical patients and their stories that drew me to the industry.
I come from the analytical laboratory world, and through my dealings with the federal government, we viewed contract lab services shifting from environmental monitoring or pharmaceutical QA/QC type work into the emerging cannabis market. That included the government's first angles at setting regulatory guidelines for contamination limits and potency toxicity limits for cannabinoids. So that kind of strategy was very exciting to jump into the lab spaces, of which around the world there were very few labs that had the opportunity to work with the plant. And then, of course, underpinning all of that interest is the fact that I am a medical cannabis user since the early 90s. And I had to travel around the world for my career and couldn't access cannabis under those different laws. And as a lifelong patient on it, I feel like it's kind of my care of duty to come back into the space and help law reform in other countries that will put laboratory analysis at kind of the pin of patient safety.
Wow. That's quite an array for responses there. Thank you, everyone. If we were to, we don't have an audience here, so we're not fielding questions. Let's say I was a large LP and, I've entered into this market where things appear to be one way and then quickly they shift to essentially how they are right now. This is a market where competition is at an all-time high, where, product quality is really at the nexus from whether it's an analytical perspective or an actual qualitative perspective from the user's perspective. How could an LP really leverage what they already have as assets to effectively improve the value of their product. And it could be only in perception, but what kinds of things do you guys think, an LP could underpin to move that in the right direction?
Okay, well, I'll start it off. I think it's pretty tough. I think maybe introducing different genetics. I know it's somewhat difficult with some of the regulations in the market, but getting something that is new, whether it's like purchasing genetics or even crossing them on your own. I don't see a lot of that going on, but like a lot of growers out there just growing the same things. You'll see a lot of repeats on the OCS or whatnot, but differentiating maybe in that sense, even looking for to expand on your terpenes, maybe rarer terpenes in your products that are shown to have medicinal effects. You obviously can't claim that on your product, but maybe you can grow a product that has 3% higher terpenes than anyone else. That'd be a big benefit.
Interesting. So really, if I'm not mistaken, something that an LP could do would be to actually diversify their genetic portfolio.
Yes, and specifically like the terpene output as well. I do enjoy like even going on the OCS. It's I'm from Ontario, so that's what I'm going to talk to. But even I know there's been some that I like, and you can actually go to that terpene profile, copy it, paste it in the search bar, and find others that have the same profile. So that was really great. Like I don't know if even many people have done that before. I love doing that. And then even from there, maybe there's one terpene that maybe there's an article out there that says it helps with inflammation. Maybe obviously an LP, their products can claim to help with that, but just we try to grow a product that has a high amount of that terpene, and the consumer will decide for themselves if it works for that or not.
And in our current legislation, making any claims is actually quite forbidden under the Health Canada Cannabis Act. So I don't know that they would necessarily be doing that, but yes, the diversity that exists out there within the scope of the terpenes is growing in popularity. But the market right now appears to be driven solely on the THC content. Regardless of what your crop has as genetic potential, I should say, there's really a few set of variables that are actually influencing what that plant will be putting out. And I'm of the belief that one of them is the environmental controls to the environment. Does anyone have anything to say about environmental controls and their relationship to product quality?
Yeah, I can take this one. Surveillance of the grow rooms and in their current phase, the plant's current phase of growth, can tune epigenetics in the plant, which is how the plant uses its genetic code to adapt, be resilient, fight off infections, and hopefully produce a high yielding flower. Without knowing and dialing in this well and measuring at a regular frequent interval, it is hard to tell when the plant health gets off track. And so I think what the law and the legislation around GPP has put in is attention to in-room monitoring or monitoring environmental parameters. But new buildings, new facilities, new HVAC, new personnel entering and exiting destabilize rooms from their plan on paper. And it takes a few cycles to understand those parameters well and when they're deviating out of normal. And I think that although in theory we're putting all the right pace into the record keeping, I think though new buildings struggle to stabilize to really produce a very identical systematic product every single round. And I think yet the years ahead in the cannabis industry will tune that a little better. But I would say all LPs struggle with environmental room monitoring stability. The bigger your room, the harder it is to stabilize. And then what do you do when it's off track?
You said something, you said new rooms. Do you mean a room A versus room B, or, I have plan A and then I tweak it to plan B, which is completely different than a room identical, but next door?
Yeah, just new grow facilities turning on all their grow rooms, all within staggered time. I think you develop the facility, you start your genetics into a given grow space, and it really takes maturity of that cycle to understand room parameters. So what I mean by
So
new
would you say
is
that,
facility in 1 year doesn't break in GPP.
right?
You know, my
Would you
colleagues
say
here in
that there's a
pharma
bit of a
know
rush?
that 1 year doesn't break in your building necessarily.
Would you say that there's a bit of a rush then to get the facility up and running?
Well, certainly, because investors and equity holders of those businesses want revenue. And, you know, we are, you know, in tune with trying to get product out to the demand of the market. But equally in that kind of quality regime is understanding the building itself. And it is a beast. It's a systematic system. The plant is a system and the building is a system. And, you know, I think the startup has been hard for a lot of LPs.
So through practical applications, how could an LP, and there's no wrong answer here, how could an LP reasonably propose some sort of growth schedule where the rooms were, you know, out of 100%, at least they're past 70% in terms of the room being dialed in, but yet stay on the metric for costing and revenue potential? So, I mean, in a lot of cases, you can end up with, you know, 50 rooms that come online and 5 rooms that are producing the quality you want, you know, 14 that are in construction still or need some amelioration through the iterative process of growing, and then the rest that are, you know, producing sub-quality cannabis. So maybe there's a happy medium. I mean, I certainly do see a lot of companies now that have growth trajectories that are a little bit more reasonable, but that's not going to stop a lot of investors with a pitch deck that says, hey, you know, we're going to build 1 million of this or 200,000 of that. Practical applications of what we already know across the expertise that you guys have. How can we leverage some of this to make better decisions, whether it's a micro or an LP?
I can speak to that a little. And we actually, Sasha, have had a conversation about this previously about how important a preventative instead of a reactive plan is. Like thinking before you even bring a plant into the building, what you need to have in place, what potential problems are, and proactively addressing them. So once you have a full-on powdery mildew problem or a mite infestation, then you're a little bit late to solving the problem. So if you can set up your system, set up your room, set up your IPM program, your soil inputs, etc., in such a way that you prevent some of those problems in the first place, it goes a long way to avoiding those issues. And I also think realizing that you have to start smaller and slower and prove out your systems and your plans before you fill the space with 300,000 plants. Start with a few hundred, get your staff trained, get your protocols in place, and prove out that what you've done in theory will actually work in your physical facility can save a lot of heartache down the way.
Yeah, maybe I just add, I think you're right on with that set of statements. Also, you know, traditional pharma does R&D and does R&D on QA/QC. So there's R&D on the product, but there's also R&D on QA/QC. And we have seemed to leap ahead on, we have this great product and it can sell instantly if we get it out. And without doing that R&D portion, I think you lose the ability of insight. And I think quality professionals do have this clairvoyance. We can kind of hedge it ahead of production staff in some ways, but you need to be unified on that proactivity. And so I agree with you completely. See the risk ahead and manage it. And you need to invest some into QA/QC R&D. What is the spec? When are you going to know you're outside of it? And all pharma does this, and they do that before releasing a product.
if we were to double back to what Troy was, essentially asking for in the marketplace is more genetic diversity, how would one small or large company realize where one is a novelty and may not sell, one strain is a novelty and may not sell, whereas, if I grew Pink Kush, let's say, and I already knew it was in almost oversupply, how would I differentiate the value of, doing R&D, even on some QA/QC, or delineating my R&D in the onset of the facilities development or even the business's development? I mean, I think that's a sticky, no pun intended, place for a lot of companies to be in, because they're entering into a market where it's already saturated and there is already X amount in the hundreds of kilos of a particular strain. So differentiating what strain to even grow is an issue of not only QA/QC, but the intent and the purpose of why the company is there. So I'm looking to you guys to kind of help the audience justify maybe why they would grow a strain that's already out there, or why they wouldn't, and really develop something different.
I think
Sure, sorry, go for it.
I was just going to say that while I definitely agree that genetic diversity is needed and important, I don't think that every single company has to be all things to all people. And it may have been one of the learning curves that we've seen in the industry, is not every company has to make every single strain, and focusing in on what you're good at and what you can provide to the market, I think is something that we're going to see occur more and more as the industry develops. And from a medical standpoint, I do think that we still have far too much inconsistency, and medical patients have a difficult time consistently finding a medicine that works for them. So instead of focusing on every new novel strain, I do think it's also important to consistently provide the strains that people want while we're doing that R&D and branching out and bringing in even more strains into the market.
Yeah, it's truly hard for me to fathom, honestly, having all these brands in 5 years, 400 brands starting up. What is the brand statement? What's the differentiation of the brand, of which the cannabis genetics underneath hold that differentiation of the brand? So really some consolidation, I think, is healthy for the industry. And then high demand, high supply strains can be furnished by many companies, and the brand still holds because you are, behind a mission to have a high CBD flower, or a mission of a craft grower producing it in small scale is also a great mission. And supporting the smaller businesses via then always supporting the large corporations. So I think brand consolidation still needs to happen. And I think it is really honorable for some LPs to just be suppliers for other people's brands. I think that's very honorable if they do it well. I don't think every LP needs to be their own brand.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to Jennifer's point too about consistency, which I think is a really good point as well. I've seen like some pretty high ranges on the market, like even some is like 8 to 10%, which is pretty crazy. One day you could get a 20% strain that maybe you really liked, and then next day you go back and get a 12%, which would be very different experience. So I think that's something that, if you are trying to dial in on what you're good at, like maybe as the example you shared, that Pink Kush strain, dial in on that consistency so that if someone does really like that, or a group of people really like that, they're going to be getting the exact same thing every time.
Okay. Well, we've been touching on, genetic strains, facilities and their size and the time that it takes to bring a room online to the point where it's able to consistently put out the same product quality, whether that's in a brand or white label arrangement. A lot of the QA constraints, well, they're all going to be up for interpretation, but they're generally going to be the same. Otherwise, it's all being held back, or you'll have a recall. So in terms of really, validating the crop or releasing a batch for the market to get to a board to ultimately end up with a consumer, what are some of the practical applications of our various skill sets that we can drive as value adds for these producers, whether they are LPs or micros?
So I can maybe speak to that a little bit based on some of the things that I've seen as sort of knowledge gaps, is to improve, to get things to market faster and better quality, is really using their SOPs, having well polished procedures that are being used regularly, that staff are being trained on these procedures and understand their expectations. Often what we see as a consequence of not using the SOPs is there's a lot of time and money being wasted, a lot more errors, lack of reproducibility, poor record keeping, and then this leads to more inspections and potential recalls. So it's really, using the tools that you have within the organization directly associated with your processes and ensuring your staff are properly trained.
Yeah, I agree there completely. I think another value add is properly doing specifications on packaging and the materials for packaging. It is awful when you get a bag and you've gotten the same brand a couple times and the packaging itself is an experience to open, and it is not reproducible in my opinion, being a cannabis user. I get the same package from the same company, and it is not opening the same way. It is sometimes a struggle. Sometimes I even have to get pliers out. So packaging specs, the labeling on the packaging is a differentiation to the customer who is, trying to purchase and get the same product every time.
That's an interesting one. From a consumer standpoint, they likely, and if I'm speaking for all consumers at once, they likely don't want to have to struggle to get into their product. It's the Cannabis Act that's really driving these decisions. But again, the businesses are all pivoting from different positions, yet selecting packaging that all has to be child resistant. So there is, I don't think, a huge opportunity for differentiation if it all has to be CR. But, I'm sure over time, do you guys think that this may relax a little so that you could achieve the same experience each time you open?
It's not so much the CR that's the problem, it's the manufacturing specs that put all the layers of packaging identical to a quality standard, verified, and then released. Like the tamper-proof, the actual lid, or if it's a bag, how the bag is sealed at the top. It is sometimes a rushed procedure. It can differentiate, even if it's to the law, which has to be CR and has to be plain. I mean, the differentiation of opening a quality controlled packaged product versus one that appears to be rushed, meets compliance, but rushed to the market, and then that consumer has issues with it. It's still child proof, but it's not. It's like adult proof too, right? So you need to have specs, and I do think it will differentiate some customers over others. I know I have stopped purchasing a brand because the packaging itself was bad, not because of the CR, but because of the actual quality to release the package.
Do you think this is evident through a lot of the phase 2 products that have hit the market, not only dry flower? And I mean, we're here to speak to improving the product, which comes from the crop. But now, as of more recently, that crop goes into a lot more products than it originally did, whether it was, under the Medical Act, now is in dozens of different SKUs as individual SKUs, let alone their actual SKU with respect to the strain and the dosage.
I think what we'll see is an evolution of the packaging along with everything else. The demand is going to necessitate that packaging companies, meet the needs that the cannabis companies have. And it was all done rather quickly. So companies are trying to get something out there that would meet the regulations, meet the packaging requirements, and it was all done in a hurry. So I definitely think that over time, we're going to see companies take this business opportunity to develop better packaging, and then we'll have more access. There's a period of time at the beginning of the 2.0 packaging, 2.0 release, that you're just lucky to find any packaging that met regulations. So of course, companies are going to step in and want to fill that gap and that need. And I do believe we'll see packaging develop not only in ease of use, but I really hope we'll also see an environmental improvement.
Yeah, I was just going to agree that there is a huge environmental impact as well that is certainly been highlighted, and I know there's various companies that are looking at producing other packaging materials, but there's just the push to get it regulated and approved. But I'm very much supportive of them working on some of the hemp products for packaging. It's a cleaner, simpler, easily shipped product rather than, there's so much dead space right now with some of the packaging that's being used. And then I think there's also the place where they're going to be looking at stability of the product as well. So I agree with everything that's been said about this, that there really is, this is an evolution. It's going to get better. It's just the rush that happened has created some of these issues that we're dealing with now.
What kind of resources are out there that you guys don't mind sharing for the micro scene, or maybe the LP that's not oversaturated in product and has a pragmatic approach to building? What kind of resources exist for these companies to better enable them to make these decisions? Because we've already crossed the spectrum on opportunities for decision making within the scope of the facility, right down to the value-added product.
Like decisions regarding the packaging specifically?
No. So what resources exist for an LP or a micro to better make decisions across the whole spectrum of decisions that they do in fact have to make, from facility design, R&D, SOPs, extraction, through to value-added product creation? I mean, they're interdisciplinary question here. What resources exist for someone in the market that they could at least glean some sort of insight from?
Something that I've noticed is a lot of the micros that I've been working with recently are really collaborating and sharing lessons learned and working together rather than being so competitive, really pulling together and sharing information that they've learned along the way. So that's really great to see. And I know, there's cannabis consultants out there that have worked in the industry now for several years and have seen a lot of things of what not to do and potentially what to do, and the opportunities to go to different conferences prior to this year and meet with some of the vendors out there who have some of the great products that have been proven successful with other companies. So I think it's great to see these micros are really pulling together and sharing their lessons learned.
Yeah.
Those are some.
Sorry, Jen. There are the resource known as the C45 Quality Association group that through a membership fee is honestly paramount to getting QAs sharing peer-reviewed information, not just information posted by general people on Twitter, but actually peer-reviewing people's experience with quality of cannabis. I think any micro that does not have a QAP on staff should at least consult a QAP regularly, whether that's a minor contract or whatever. And that QA should be a member of the association to get current on all the intelligence that Health Canada releases, and just becoming part of a network of highly trained professionals in the industry.
Hmm. What kind of justification case might a LP or a micro have to put up for even something as simple as environmental monitoring? I mean, all these new facets of the business really, come at an additional cost that's eroding the bottom line. So, what type of practical application, business case adjustment for, I realize this is a loaded question. How can we justify baseline environmental monitoring? It's suggested in the Act.
I
I
think
would say
one way is
go ahead.
sorry, not to contradict what you said at all, but I think you start by not looking at it as eroding the bottom line. You look at it as adding to the bottom line. Because when people see quality in the environmental monitoring as a negative and something they have to implement, then they literally do the bare minimum, which leads to non-quality crops, which leads to loss. So as a quality professional, I firmly believe if you look at quality as an investment and an addition to your profit and your revenue, then you do everything from a quality mindset. You grow great crops that are good quality and you don't have that same amount of loss. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on you.
No problem. I agree with what you said. I was just going to say contaminated cannabis does not sell well and it's a risk to the consumer. So it does affect the bottom line at the end of the day. So I think if they understand that, that should be pretty simple and clear.
Yeah, I
Let's say
completely
though,
agree. So I was gonna say I
let's
completely agree,
imagine
and
oh,
sorry, I've even seen a lot of facilities, even maybe lose half their crop, and maybe because they weren't doing proper environmental monitoring, they didn't even know there was an issue. You're losing half that crop. That's revenue coming off the bottom line. There's no question about that. And the analogy we like to use about it is, you wouldn't drive your car without any sensors on it. You wouldn't know if you need an engine check, your oil check, gas. So really, if you're operating your facility without any checks or any monitoring, you've no idea what's really going on.
so imagine I come from a market that has been around for, I don't know, 100 years. Coming into cannabis, applying some of the same schools of thought and ways of operating that some of the executives may or may not have going into cannabis doesn't necessarily or may not necessarily lend to being aware that these micro details can really have a devastating effect or improvement on your product and really your business's value. So believe me, I'm in alignment with the panel today. I'm asking questions to kind of push a little further to emulate who could be asking random questions in the audience.
So if I could jump in on that just for a second, having been at Peace Naturals, the first licensed company, I can honestly say that I think a mistake that we made was focusing solely on cannabis professionals and cannabis growers. And not that we didn't need that input, because absolutely we did. But at the beginning of this industry, professionals who know about plants in general were somewhat left out. And there is so much that agronomists, botanists, plant chemists can add. At the end of the day, cannabis is a plant and does have so much to learn from those other industries. So I feel like it would have been of great benefit if we had brought those professions with years and decades of experience along with the cannabis experts. I think we would have had greater success in all facilities. And those professionals have certainly entered the industry now, but it seemed to take a little while before we realized that cannabis is a plant and does have specific things to cannabis, but shares a lot with growing of other crops and plants.
And we're getting into the imaginary Q&A now, where I'm going to dig through conversations that we've had to ask some random questions to the panel overall. So here, I would like to know if the panel has an opinion on what to do with biomass that may be contaminated and the justification for destruction or processing. And when I say processing, I actually mean running a solvent over the material. How does the panel feel about that?
Well, I think first off, I feel sad that that cannabis didn't make it to the end and it got contaminated in whatever way. With some good biosecurity and sanitation practices, you could have made it. But if you get to that point, there are some post-harvest remediation techniques. I think a lot of people will be familiar with irradiation. There's some evidence that it does reduce your terpenes. However, if you're in that point and you want to still sell that product, that is an option. And then, you can down the line, you can extract that or do whatever you wish with it.
I do think there is a market for cannabis at all levels of quality in the nascent areas of the industry. I think some extractors even want a lot of fresh cannabis that may be showing indications of contamination. I think we'd have to pinpoint on what contamination actually is. But I think Troy's right on post-remedy solutions are there. There is a market for extractables, and there is a market for textiles. So there's markets for even product that's not meant direct to consumer. And let's face it, wouldn't it be great that there's ranges of prices for materials that would be earmarked for different supply chains? It's not necessarily you're trying to grow to a certain price per gram. And I think as you develop more ruggedness in supply chains, you will have avenues to sell product that slips up and doesn't meet the quality mark for wholesale as a consumer product.
Yeah, and I would agree. I'm just going to add that I would feel that destruction is really your last option, because there are remediation opportunities, there are extraction opportunities, and various other ways of using that cannabis rather than having to destroy it.
Yeah, it's a quagmire. I think there's a lot of executives making decisions in cannabis that would be great for other businesses, but when it comes to cannabis and understanding, these heirloom tomatoes that you're cultivating have a value in not only tomato sauce, but fresh tomatoes, you really can kind of pragmatically approach actually having to take a write down. If you have spoilage, or let's say you have oversupply and it's sitting in the vault for much longer than you really want it to, what can I do to get out of this potential write down that could destroy my quarter? In a lot of cases, we know this for a fact based on StatsCan, that there is an oversupply in the vaults of Canadian LPs. So, this question to improvement, is it reflected by what has happened or what will be happening going forward? So if LPs and micros are tuned into this, wanting to take practical application of their facilities that they already have, we can do one of two things. One would be, continue the same disparaging results of, content sitting in vaults and not doing anything, or we can drive this to a position of creating value and really reducing the risk associated to the industry. Because even from a financial perspective, no one wants to invest in cannabis right now. They are leery of it because they're seeing what the news is posting about, oversupply and lack of it. So we really need to band together. They need you guys to tell them what to do. They need resources from you guys that they can click, log on to, and say, okay, we need to start making our decisions in a manner that will support the business and its survival.
Maybe I'll speak to product and vaults. I think one phenomenon of government retailing is that you pre-sold a SKU before actually having it. And then when they don't match up, we have inventory surplus. And until you can sell into multi-laned supply chains, I think that inventory is going to start to depart because there'll be places to sell it. And I think that rolled back into what I said earlier is that brand consolidation is going to be a wonderful thing. I don't think 400 companies need to have their own brands. They could be an amazing company just feeding a brand that is already well specified and your inventory can turn quickly. So I think the inventory vault problem is temporary, and I think that will start to relieve the ruggedness of SKUs at the provincial level. Retailing will demand more streamlined products into those SKUs. Some SKUs will drop off, and some will continue to put more volume into them. And then that inventory will hopefully turn quickly because inventory costs money to hold.
The millions and millions of square feet of...
It's really knowing product specifications and how do you build products into those specifications routinely and reliably.
I'm not sure if that was captured or was me, but can you repeat the first sentence of your last statement?
Yeah, product specifications is going to be the key to releasing the vault, right? Releasing the inventory in the vault. Understanding your product specifications and how you are pre-selling the product. If you're off of spec, you can't put it into that supply chain anymore. So then you got to have an alternative, have alternative places for sale. But if you can nail specifications, your procedures, your quality, your production, materials management, all that's tight to the specs, you should have velocity into that pre-sales. If you are deviating from that, that's when your vault lines inventory up because you are missing your specifications.
Do you guys want to pick a subject and go back and forth on it? We can touch on everything within the scope of the name, or we can dig a little deeper. I mean, we've gotten into the weeds on packaging, on SOPs, on some aspects of QA. Is there anything that rings for you guys? You know, imagine we were all sitting on a stage. What do you think would come up organically? Or if we had someone from the audience ask us, what do you think people want to know?
I think they want to know how to get their samples to pass the analytical testing. Right? I mean, there's so many of these micros right now that are sending in their samples and they're not passing their tests and they don't know what to do. They don't know what the problem is. So I do think that they need guidance around, you know, proper sanitation in the facility, ensuring staff understand cross-contamination. You don't wear a lab coat in one room and then continue to go through every room, bring a dirty lab coat through and contaminate every room. So I think that's something that a lot of micros have been sort of reaching out to me about is how do they more effectively ensure that they can pass their analytical testing.
That's music to my ears.
Oh, pardon me, Troy, go ahead.
So I was going to say that's music to my ears. That's exactly what I would have chosen as a hot topic as well. I'm actually coming from the other side of it, where we actually work with LPs for them to pass those analytical tests. You know, a lot of them will come to us. Maybe they want to increase their clone success rate, or maybe they want to grow without irradiation after whatever their goal is. And you know, there's a lot of data and science to go into cleaning, disinfection, sanitation, biosecurity, whatever you want to call it. And there's a lot of little things that we've taken from other industries like pharma, you know, agriculture that we've brought to cannabis and obviously tweaked, but it is an extremely important part of the process that I feel is often overlooked until it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is e-beaming and irradiation de facto for everybody? Does it become standard practice? I think that's a real question we'd have to ask ourselves. I'm not sure I think it's a quest for everybody to not have a microbial issue during the final dry stage. But I think irradiation is becoming de facto. It's becoming part of procedures because it is very hard to hedge and mitigate it early.
I think
If we didn't have
my big topic would have been the same as Bridgette's. It's just that people are not always considering, staff movement and proper gowning and even where does your HVAC go, et cetera, all of those things, sanitation. Outside of that topic, my next big one would have been the outdoor grows or hemp farmers who try to find a sale for their hemp after they've grown it and do not consult with a QA professional or the LP they're going to sell to beforehand to understand the impact of the soil and what was grown there before and possible drift and environmental, outside conditions that you may or may not be able to control, and the importance of understanding the impact those can have on the results you're going to get. Because when you're selling your hemp to a cannabis license holder, you have to meet the requirements of the Cannabis Act. And so you cannot sell hemp that's full of heavy metals or pesticides, even to an extractor where those things are just going to compound. So much of this could be avoided if they had those conversations beforehand and understood some of the measures that they could take to control those things. It's another topic I'm talking to a lot of people about recently, outdoor grows, hemp farmers, in addition to all of the things that Brigitte and Tracy were mentioning.
Shameless plug time. Where can we find you guys?
I think QAs really enjoy LinkedIn, some Twitter, but LinkedIn seems to grab a lot of content around technical science, technical writing. So my main platform is LinkedIn, where you can find me at Brigitte Simons. I'm there.
Great. Yeah, same with myself and the Shield Disinfectants as well, which is the product line that I work with. We're on LinkedIn as well. We share a lot of great data, blogs, all that to support everyone in the biosecurity side of things.
Thanks. Yeah, it's Tracy Woodward here, and I can be found on LinkedIn as well.
Jen Caldwell and Twitter or LinkedIn. And I just realized I thought Brigitte was Tracy and Tracy was Brigitte this entire time.
Hi.
Sorry, ladies.
No problem.
Welcome to the internet. Guys, I would really like to thank you for your time today and your time in the past to collaborate and connect. I would also like to thank the audience for their attention, and we will be excited to answer your questions in the Q&A upcoming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.